who has access to what? If you are looking for identity and access management talk, you have come to the right place. This is the Identity at the Center podcast. Hosts Jeff Stedman and Jim McDonald are strategic advisors with Identropy's advisory services practice and are here to talk about a wide range of identity and access management topics. Comments, questions, and accolades can all be sent to identityatthecenter.com. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of Identity at the Center. I am Jeff, and we've also got Jim on the line. Say hi, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. Hi, everyone.
And we've got a special guest this week, Jim, don't we?
Yes, we have Ash Motiwala. So Ash is the co-CEO of Identropy. I've been with Identropy for almost 8 years, and I've known Ash for a little bit longer than that. I mean, he is truly a legend within our industry. I'm going to see if I can make him blush here a little bit, but he really is. He's somebody who has been in the industry for probably 15 plus years, I guess, obviously prior to 2006, and he's worked with hundreds of companies to do what we're doing now, Jeff, which is developing IAM strategies for our clients. So Ash kind of invented the process that we do today. Obviously, he's borrowed the learnings from people over the years, but we wanted to have Ash on today to kind of give his perspective and talk through kind of the history of the company, why he started Identropy, some of the different phases of growth that we've gone through, and what he sees as the future, not only for Identropy, but for the IAM industry as a whole. So welcome to the podcast, Ash.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you, and congrats on this podcast. Been listening, and great work.
It truly is a gem in the podcast space, I like to say.
It's one of the few IAM podcasts, and I'm not sure if that's luck or just lack of interest. But
I'm just going to go ahead and say we're the best IAM podcast because I don't think there are any other ones, so we just get it by default.
We're definitely in the top 10.
Definitely a top 10, that's for sure.
There you go.
So Ash, you've been in the space for a while, right? And I think there was one thing that Jim forgot to mention. I think you've actually got some patents. Is that right? Oh yeah, I mean that has to deal with the software startup that we did in the middle of the Identropy history. We had a software startup, so yeah, there were some patents there. To be honest, there was a team of people who really put the bulk of the effort in there, and I just get to rubber stamp my name in there. But yeah, we do. It's a nice thing to put on your profile. Yeah, for sure. Jim, were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Ash, if you could kind of take us back to 2005, 2006, when you and Victor Barris got together to start this company. Kind of what was it that projected you into this space, and why did you want to start a company? How did you figure that you could do something different and more value add than maybe what was being done elsewhere?
Oh yeah, I wish it was a more eventful story than it was. Victor and I used to work for another consulting company that we weren't terribly fond of, and we said we could probably do a better job. And that's pretty much how Identropy started back in 2006. We did start as a consulting company. We were part of a larger security consulting firm that did lots of different areas. And we really felt that there was a need in the market for a focused company on identity and access management. We believed it, had amazing growth potential. And, myself becoming a sort of an identity geek or so, I'm terribly fascinated with the problem, and still am fascinated by the problem as it continues to evolve. But yeah, so that's kind of how we started it off, and we learned along the way, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, both of us did have previous startup experience, so it's not like we came in flat. But doing it in this space was definitely a new thing, and it was such a great time because like everybody, I mean, we're still a relatively small group, but back then, really everybody knew everybody. If you went to a conference, you pretty much knew everybody in the world that cared about identity at that time. And so you got to rub elbows with some interesting people, and those connections are really what helped us do all the great things that we've been able to do over the years.
Who did you find yourself competing with in the beginning? Was it mostly Big Four consulting firms or other companies that were kind of like you guys?
There's a little of both. So back then, I remember there were a couple of companies. So there was a company called Neogent.
Entology. There was an Entology.
Entology. There we go. Entology. That's right. Okay, so Entology focused on, I believe it was Sun or Oracle, one of those two, right? And I think PwC picked those guys up.
They were Oracle. Yep.
Yeah. Rex, I think, was the guy, right, who was head over there. I'm not sure if he's still at PwC or not.
So Larry was the owner, and Rex was the, I guess, managing partner or CTO, right?
Yep. And I remember looking at that company. There's another company called Neogent based out of California that was partnered up with Sun. And those were the ones who were like, hey, I want to be those guys when we grow up. And, they had interesting little tools that they had to, speed up deployment work. And so that's kind of what we started off doing. And we really started off on Microsoft and Corian. And, very quickly when we wanted to go and sell these solutions to customers, this happened almost immediately. We identified that customers would say, this is great technology, but we don't have our act together yet. We don't have our project drivers laid out and our vision and roadmap. And so, we're going to be working on that. So get back to us. And when we heard that one too many times, we said, we could probably help solve that problem. And that was really the birth of the advisory program.
So you did advisory services by yourself for a while, right? I mean, or was it, I guess I don't know the full history. I know that I saw some of the early documents that you produced, and kind of I feel like we're still using the same framework today, but it's evolved over time. But talk us through some of those early advisories. Were you by yourself or were you in a team?
So I would sometimes work with a team meaning two people, right? Or sometimes by myself for the first 4 or 5 of them. And so we're trying to figure it out. We go and talk to customers what makes sense. We'd already done a lot of projects, so we had a lot of experience, but we just didn't have a way to package it, to give it to a customer in a program fashion. And I think that was really the impetus for us to start thinking about that. And very early on, I did a few, and then we brought on Frank Villavicencio. Of course, Frank, that's how me and you know each other, Jim, right?
I know Frank. I mean, Frank is another legend in the space.
So yeah, Frank would help. So I think we came up with an initial framework, and then very quickly I'm good at starting stuff, not so good at putting the polish. And so I had a few great ideas, put them together, started delivering them, getting some experience, and then got Frank involved, and he really took it to a next level. And I think throughout the experience of Identropy's advisory arm, we've always had really great, smart people who brought their own take and perspectives and added things to the program, as you guys are doing right now. And I think that's really what's made it great. It really hasn't just, I would argue, it has not rested on just the initial spark. It's always evolved and come up with new approaches and based on the industry changes. I think that's what makes it so relevant and why it's been such a successful part of our business.
I kind of feel like Frank has probably left his mark on Identropy more than any other single person that's not here any longer, wasn't one of the founders. I mean, he really, I always remember him talking about, we want to revolutionize IAM, and some of his sayings were just really memorable, like cows moo. It's like, he would say something like that, and you'd be like, what? And then it would just click for you at some point where, like, okay, I get what he means. But the other big thing, so when I joined the company, the two things that, and these were two of the reasons why I joined the company. One was, we want to revolutionize IAM, and it really had meaning. It was like, at the time, more than 50% of IAM initiatives were failing. And it was like, we want to change that. We want to have a big impact on the industry to change how that's happening. And we played our part because that is no longer the case. The other was just building a company with a strong culture. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the culture, but to me, that was always, kind of a centerpiece of Identropy.
Yeah, sure. And Frank was definitely a big part of that as well. I think when we're small, it was easy to maintain culture. As you start growing and adding people, I think the magic is, how do you keep that going, and how do you maintain that culture amongst people? Frank was huge in that. I remember just another Frank story. This is going to become a Frank Pat podcast. We just send this to him. I'm sure you appreciate it. But I remember one of the first advisors I did. I went overboard and wrote a 100-page document, right? And just poured my heart out in terms of what this vision is for this company and all that type of thing. And then Frank came out and he read it and he's like, "This is awesome, Ash, but nobody's going to read this."
Yeah, I feel the same way when I see a long report. I've been on the customer side. It's just like, come on, man. No one's going to read 100 pages or 200 pages or 300 pages of anything. Just get to the point.
Yeah, I think you guys just saw that. We went to a customer recently and they sent the previous attempt at this and they gave us 250-page document. That was, all right. Yeah, I mean, I'm in identity and I love this stuff and I'm not reading this.
Yeah. I was looking for the point. What's the point? Looking through each page.
Yeah, that's right. So he's actually, Frank was the one who actually said, away with the documents, we're going PowerPoint, and it's much better format for what we want to accomplish. Keep it simple, try to keep it under so many slides, really get to the point, create 2 versions, one for the executives, one for the general population of attendees and stakeholders. And so, I think he really added this, additional level of pragmatism, I would say, to the program that helped. The same I'd say for culture. I think that was more of a joint thing. Part of doing. What really differentiates one company from the next is what your day-to-day experience is like. And I think the most valuable part that impacts that is culture. So we've always spent a lot of time thinking about culture and maintaining it and spending time and effort and really trying to live by that. And so we believe in things like transparency and autonomy, so that we're not micromanaging. There's a lot of things like that. I think those are really valuable things because it keeps us on a certain path and keeps us true to our mission, and allows people to hold each other accountable, because these values are beyond any of us in individual, from an individual perspective. But as a team, it allows us to keep ourselves at least on the right track.
Yeah, what I thought was cool was when I joined the company, I was like the 30th employee. I was employee number 30, and only 33 or 34 people had ever been employed by the company. And of the people that had left, it was they had left on their terms or whatever to go pursue something, but it wasn't like there was a lot of turnover. And I attribute a lot of that to the culture, right? It was a place that people wanted to be. So I thought that was really cool. But you alluded a little bit earlier, it was around that time that Identropy was getting into what I think was a real attempt to revolutionize IAM, and we're developing an identity as a service platform. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I think at the time it was, well, I don't think I know, at the time it was called Squid Lifecycle. So maybe talk to us a little bit about Squid Lifecycle, what the dream was for that, and then the whole life cycle of Squid Lifecycle.
Yeah. So that basically happened in 2010 or so, where we raised some venture capital and started building software. And at that point, we effectively spun out. I want to say effectively, because it's not totally true. It was still legally one entity, but we did our best to run 2 organizations as one. And for any listeners, never do that. That's a lesson learned as an entrepreneur, that you don't want to run a consulting and a software business under one umbrella. Seems kind of obvious looking back, but at the time, there were some positives for keeping them under one umbrella that we thought was worth it. But anyway, I ran the software side. Victor continued to run the services side, and we did that for a number of years, and until about 2014, we were going to raise our B round of funding, and there were a couple of interested parties who wanted to wanted to acquire Squid, and ultimately it was acquired by Computer Associates around that time. And the consulting part of the company continues to live on, and so that's the story. But it was so the vision behind it at the time was, people had these really bulky old Oracle type of implementations and would take ridiculous amount of time and very low success. And the idea was to create a lighter weight version of that's cloud based. That really took advantage of the trend at that time, and so we built out a platform around that. In fact, a number of the people who we brought on were industry guys who had helped build those software companies to begin with. So we had like Nishant Kaushik who joined us. We had Ranjit Vidwans who joined us. And all these other. Tom Neckel joined us as well, and then
we're legends in the space.
Yeah, good folks, and it was a fun time. I think we all really enjoyed it, and as any startup it had its roller coaster moments, but it was a lot of fun looking back, and happy to hear where things ended. And a number of the folks ended up at CA and stayed there for about 3 years, and I'd say most of them have moved on by now.
That gave so that was a major part of the life cycle of Identropy, was building this product and having consulting services essentially, support the company, basically having an income stream to continue with building the product. Of course, there were investors and all of that, but we made a shift at a certain point after the sale to CA. The shift was essentially 100% IAM consulting. And so that was our moniker for quite a while. And I think that was to highlight the fact that we're not a product company anymore. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that just comes down to marketing, right? And you have to make sure that customers understand what you're doing and who you are. A lot of times you can get caught up. I think this is one of the biggest problems that startups face, and why I would recommend having a very singular focus on any startup that a person runs is you have to know exactly who you are and what your value prop is to a customer. And if you have more than one, then chances are there's a problem with your business model. And so part of that, changing that moniker at the time was really to focus attention to the customer, to say, what we're doing. It was a very broad-based marketing approach, but I think we've evolved out of that now, where we're starting to really come into our own again as a consulting company and thinking about, emerging trends, what are the newest things, and really trying to push the envelope rather than, simply being a traditional identity partner who goes and implements a specific technology.
Is there a particular technology that you think is right on the cusp of becoming mainstream? Kind of like how we saw IGA over the last maybe decade or so, kind of ride that wave, and then we've seen behavior analytics start to come up over the last few years. What's next?
I don't know if I could pick a next. That's a tough one. Do you have a next? Do you have like a...
Well, I'm a big fan of the analytics. I think that there is a lot of lost value when companies don't take advantage of the IAM data that they're collecting. So that was something that I always like to pull together, was reports and metrics and indicators, from an IAM perspective, to be able to measure, right? How are things working? A lot of people kind of think of like the basic stuff, right? How long does it take to create an account? How many password sets we're doing, those sorts of things. But I was looking for things to, provide more value or to find anomalies, that might be interesting. A lot of it's been taken over by the AI side of things, though, companies like Exabeam and others.
Well, I think this is one of the areas where Identropy shines, right? Where we have brains who can think about where these next things are going. And I'm very excited about analytics in specific, but not on its own, not as standalone. I'm more interested about how it interacts with identity. Obviously from an identity practitioner's perspective, the future is identity. Everything is identity. There's nothing more important than identity. It's the central paradigm of everything, every problem that exists out there. But there's a truth to it, because of the quote unquote disappearing perimeter and all those at this point overused phrases. Yeah. But here's a practical example of where analytics plays in. You have it play into adaptive authentication, where you actually can do things a lot more real time, right? And you have, instead of a rules-based type of engine, have analytics starting to feed that so that it could make decisions on the fly regarding what level of authentication is required for a specific transaction. And those kind of things are really cool, right? Where you start seeing traditional identity technologies starting to interact in nuanced ways with other cyber technologies that are out there. And the net result is that now you could do things a lot more efficiently, intelligently than you've ever been able to do that as before. I think that authentication, that whole world, I think, is changing because of those types of mashups.
Yeah, there's so many different ways now, and just the way that the technology has evolved, where you're taking milliseconds to make these decisions through logic that's been embedded with whatever application you're using, adaptive authentication or continuous authentication, right? Things where they're detecting the cadence of your typing. I mean, all these kinds of they sound kind of fringe, but when you add them all together, can create a very powerful and relatively secure. Nothing's perfect, but relatively secure authentication change.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that's interesting. I think the other area that really interests me too is the interface elements of IAM. So when I think of like your traditional IAM, right, it's a web page. You go to it, put in some pieces of data, and then you click submit, and then something happens. What's after that? Are we going to have? I probably said before, right? Things like Siri, Cortana, Alexa. Is there going to be a chatbot interface where you're able to do things along those lines? What does the next generation of IAM look like from a how do you interact with it? Is it going to be like a computer that you talk to, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are a little bit out because it's ultimately going to come down to natural language generation and processing type of technologies maturing, and those are just starting to come out right now. I think recently Google released some new APIs that allow you to do detection in understanding what different, let's say, sets of data mean, or natural language inputs if they both mean the same thing, right? And I think that as those things start to mature, I think you can definitely start applying it to identity. I think that's a bit out. But the other part about where from the authentication, adaptive authentication, that's here now. We were talking about passwordless authentication a couple of years ago, like, oh, this is the panacea. I mean, we're starting to see Nishant, for example, Nishant Kaushik, who was Squid CTO, worked with us here. He went over, now he's CTO at Uniken, is it? I forget the name of the company. Uniken, there's the competitor's call sign, right? That whole space. I remember reading a term, it's called invisible MFA. And that's pretty cool. Those are the kind of things that are actually in play today. It's not even the future, right? So that I think that's exciting because the technology's here. We're starting to see the use cases. I wouldn't say it's totally mainstream yet, but I think that's definitely one of the forerunners right now for being the next wave.
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting things happening there. And, I think when we talk about the password, I think a lot of people are kind of banking on biometrics as being something that would replace the password, or at least, reduce the dependence on it. Fingerprints, retina scans, those sorts of things, palm prints. But recently there was a breach by for a company, Suprema, and they do physical access security through an application, and fingerprints and facial recognition data, along with a whole bunch of other stuff, was taken. And that's scary in that you can't change your fingerprint, at least
right?
Right, or you can't change your face, at least probably in a way that would make sense for authentication.
Mm-hmm.
The whole privacy concern around that is interesting too, and what happens in those cases where your index finger is no longer able to be used as an authenticator? Do you use another finger, or do you blacklist that one? That digit, and you have to use another finger, or a different method. There's a lot of interesting things that I think are going to come out of that breach as to what comes next.
I think like GDPR and everything that's come out of that, with privacy requirements that have emanated from that or driven that, is, I hate to say, but it is from the top down causing some type of innovation by force through compliance in the industry, right? And a lot of chatter right now happening at the analyst level about blockchain enabled identity, and I think Gartner or Forrester, one of them, has this whole thing about decentralized identity as a topic. Specifically for this issue right here, where you have multiple components, whether it be fingerprints or all the different potential inputs to authenticate a person. but how to be able to do that in a way that is out of band, right? So that it's not sitting at the actual service provider themselves. Very similar to the SAML concept, but taking that to multiple methods of authentication. I think that's going to impact countries, right? I mean, now you're going to have entire countries moving in that direction, and that's powerful stuff.
We had Luis Almeida on the podcast a couple weeks ago, and he made the comment that Sarbanes-Oxley was the best thing to happen to IAM. From an IAM vendor perspective, or people who make their living in IAM. I think GDPR has potential to be, second place to that. I mean, it's on everyone's mind. Everyone knows they have to do something because of GDPR, and everyone's trying to figure out what it is. And could be a driver in the next wave of spend. What I was going to say, Jeff, is we were talking about that topic, but before I go to there, I want to talk about secure real quick. And I did a little bit of reading on that hack, and the thing that jumped out at me more than anything, and I encourage our listeners to go out there and read an article or two, was the response from that company after that this hack was issued. And it was like, well, we'll come back with our retort when we're ready. And it was not very
comforting.
Yeah, not comforting. Yeah, that's a great word. Not comforting and not very professional, quite honestly. It's like, you know what, you just coughed up a ton of data, and that's your response. And we worked with a client recently who was a customer of One Login, and the sense that I got from them was that One Login worked very closely with them to, and we're not a One Login partner, so we don't have any stake in this, but they worked very closely with them to make sure that they understand what was at risk and what actions they needed to take to make sure that they were as secure as possible after the breach that they suffered a couple of years back. It's real important that companies, after these breaches take place, do the right things. And I would say, even for, if you're an IAM program manager in a corporate environment, thinking ahead that if you ever were breached, what are the actions that you would take? What do you have a plan in place to deal with such things? Who gets involved? And making sure that your communications go out in an orderly fashion. So that was my takeaway from that whole breach. But I did want to go all the way back to something you brought up, Jeff, about what do you think are kind of the game-changing next big waves within IAM? And what I think the next big wave is, and I'm going to cheat a little bit because I think it's already here, is the move of customer or external facing systems to leverage IAM products. So 10 years ago, very few customer facing systems were on IAM products. They were rolling their own, or maybe they had some IAM infrastructure in the background, but for the most part, they weren't leveraging cloud services, and they weren't using a automated workflow system. They were kind of building their own applications for user management, user registration, password management, and even authentication. And I see a much bigger shift away, especially in the authentication and password management space, because the services that are now being tailored, so the SAP Customer Cloud, aka Giga, and even cloud traditionally enterprise systems like an Okta or a Ping. Now Microsoft has an offering for managing credentials, managing authentication, password management, multi-factor authentication. Those things no longer make sense to build for the external environment, and products and even cloud products are being used. But I think what the next big wave is really the ability to do more advanced workflows for, as products, as cloud offerings. So, we were working with ForgeRock. They were kind of like an incumbent to Oracle and CA and IBM, because they were a newer platform built more toward updated developer methodologies for developing applications. So they really we're able to kind of bridge from the old to the new. And I think there's really a huge audience and a huge opportunity out there that if somebody can, and it can't just be basic registration workflows, it's got to be flexible. It's got to be some things where you can throw some hooks in and, change the way you do a registration, check a database, things like that. And there's some of that I see coming along, but that's really the opportunity, is the whole user lifecycle management side for external, whether it's B2B, which is very difficult to solve, or B2C, but more advanced than just hey, I'm just going to register, or I'm going to do create an account through social registration. It's the more difficult stuff, but I think that's a huge opportunity and a lot of money sitting out there that could be spent on products and cloud services.
I think those are great points, and I think you're starting to see vendors starting to move towards that, right? I mean, who in 10 years, maybe we end it like this, who in 10 years are going to be the winners in the identity space? Vendors, you guys want to stake your career on a guess?
Nope. I think it changes too much. I think you'll see some of the same players that are still out there, but 10 years is a long time in a technology space.
That's true.
A company like SailPoint's been around for a while. They've done really well for themselves, but before them it was Oracle, IBM, CA, and those guys didn't recognize the importance of the cloud and moving away from these very heavy architectures. What's next will be interesting, and there's some good products that have come out that I'm sure will give SailPoint a run for their money, and who knows what happens the next 5 years even.
I'm going to mention trends instead of actual vendors. So two trends. One trend is 10 years ago. So the trend is the willingness of people to adapt their technology to fit what's available. And what I mean by that is, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when you're looking at Oracle and CA and IBM and why they were, prior to them even, like Obelix and Netegrity, which became Oracle and CA, their strength was they were able to manage the heterogeneous environment. And they had a plug-in for Lotus Domino and for Java application servers and IS application servers, and they could throw headers at the apps. And they had a plug-in for everything, and there were multiple ways you could go about integrating. And now you look at applications, and there's like 2 or 3 ways to integrate. It's SAML, it's OpenID Connect, maybe something else. Maybe it's an API call for an authentication that isn't necessarily standards-based. Okay, but basically you go in, and those kind of companies, those kind of solutions are winning almost all the deals. Nobody's using reverse proxy anymore. Nobody's using web agents. I say nobody, that's not true. Some people are, but more and more folks are moving away from that. So the trend is, on the authentication side, we're willing to give up being special, or you need to provide a product that plugs in to our application the way it works. We're willing to change the application to make it work. That's trend number one. Trend number two is, I see most companies that are moving into the cloud, it's what we used to call cloud washing. In other words, we were saying, we're in the cloud, we got a cloud service, and really what they're doing was hosting an individual instance of their application in the cloud. And other companies were coming and saying, we are true software as a service. And we kind of know the advantage of each, right? Each one has its advantages and disadvantages. From a customer perspective, what I'm finding, most of my conversations with the customers is they don't really care about the difference, whether it's hosted in the cloud model or a software as a service model. As long as they're not having to maintain the infrastructure, maintain the core system themselves, they're good with that. They want to get a subscription model where they're paying a monthly bill or an annual bill, and they don't have to run the infrastructure. Now, obviously, software as a service goes to the furthest degree of that you can get. However, I think that most companies out there are good with a hosted instance of the software, as long as it's the vendor themselves that are doing the hosting.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I think one of the trends that's interesting to me is as the infrastructure as a service players start playing a more dominant role in an IT shop's operations, I think that becomes the source or the center of the world for them. And that if those places are starting to offer some serious identity services, they have the largest opportunity to just dominate. And that is likely Microsoft and Amazon and maybe you could put Salesforce as a distant third as a pass. But I think those kind of companies have the largest opportunity to just disrupt in a very substantial way. And you're already seeing some really interesting technologies come out of both of them, right? Microsoft has made identity a lot more central to their conversation, more than they've ever had in the past. AWS is definitely moving in that direction too, with Cognito and Lambda and all the capabilities that they're bringing out. So I think those have the largest opportunity to disrupt, and I have a feeling that they will, if they have the right team in place to acquire whatever technologies they need to build that out. I think those are the ones that could really, really own the whole market.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, and Microsoft's probably in the pole position in terms of being a platform. I think there are always going to be some organizations, some people who don't want to go the Microsoft route. And I will say, I mean, almost every component from a security perspective that Microsoft offers, there's somebody who has more capabilities, but you have to piece all those capabilities together to build your infrastructure, whereas they at least are checkbox compliant with a component for everything. And so it kind of remains to be seen if they're going to open their ecosystem so that I think the knock on Microsoft traditionally has been they build their solutions to manage Microsoft products. And so things that you have outside of Microsoft, that's where you start to fall down. Well, a lot of things have moved towards standard space, especially in the authentication space. So if it's SAML compliant now, if you have an Azure single sign-on tenant, you can integrate the application. However, when you look at something like Microsoft Privileged Access Management, it's not really threatening what, say, a CyberArk can do in terms of its ability to support many different things. So that kind of works against my first point, which is that people are willing to change their apps to fit what you've got. But I think what you really need to get to first is some kind of set of standards that are not, proprietary. They're not set by one company or another.
Well said.
Always interesting dialogue on the Identity at the Center podcast.
It's always changing. You just never know where things are going to happen next. And I think that's probably a good spot where we can leave it for now. Ash, totally, thank you for joining us and sharing your pearls of wisdom, and appreciate the time you've spent with us today.
Thank you for the invite, and it's been a pleasure working with you guys.
Great.
Thanks, Ash. Always appreciate it.
All right. We'll talk to everyone else down the road. Thanks, everybody.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.